Hello everyone, how are you friends? Welcome to my channel. So as you know, our today's topic is definition of language, functions of language and characteristics of language. So without wasting time, let's start. By and large, language is the art and skill of communication. It is through this that the interaction between human beings takes place. In any interaction of human beings, the total cultural surroundings of the communicants come into play. Language itself is a system of human culture. Once, language was man's possession. Culture, his unique adaptive mechanism, became possible. Without language, there could be no culture. For cultural propagation, man is privileged. Of all creatures on earth, he alone can talk and express himself through language. If it this unique asset with him which distinguishes him from the stupid beast, because it is the basis and bond of society. Man is a social animal, remarked Aristotle long ago, and he is a social animal by virtue of language. Society cannot exist without language any more than language can without society. Society and language are thus correlated. Evidently, language is a social product coming into being with the first community, developing with the increasing needs and demands of civilization, and disappearing when society disappears. Language is, in fact, the index of the progress of a society from its primitive stage to an advanced one. Its vocabulary increases with the growth, stability, and expansion of the society. Now, we are going to discuss the definition of language. Language has been defined variously according to one. It the means of expression of human thought. Trach calls it fossil poetry or history. Henry Sweet considers it as the expression of thought by means of speech sounds. Taylor thinks of it in terms of outward manifestations of inward workings of the mind. Says equates it with significant sound, the outward embodiment and expression, however imperfect, of though. Malinowski takes it as the necessary means of communication, without which social action is impossible. A.S. Diamond characterizes it as the embodiment of the of all the advance in thought of all our human ancestors, a diary of their day. A diary of their day to day thoughts. And lastly, Amseloch regard it as a fundamental means of preserving, transmuting, and continuously enriching the achievements of human culture. From the foregoing definitions, it is clear that language is a very valuable and it a very delicate thing. Usually, it has immense scope of modification and expansion. Dynamism is a prerequisite of a living language for being effective and up to date. It should always be ready to accommodate new elements and novel ideas into it. The moment it ceases to do so, it becomes a dead language. From the very beginning of his life, man shows his native interest in language, at least in its spoken form. There are two forms of language, spoken and written. These two forms can be easily differentiated. In the first place, the spoken form is more inclusive than the written form. The written form part of a speech may or may not bear a record of an oral language of song. In the second, the written form is a later product of man as an art as well as a mean of society activity. A mean a means of social activity. The written language is an attempt to represent the spoken language by using symbols. Thirdly, the written language is often more artistic and more precise, and as such, it excludes the fragmentary sentences, the slag, the not at expected words grammatically. Grammatical forms, syntax, and meaning of today that may become the expected language of tomorrow. Fourthly, the spoken language does not necessarily require educated people to make itself intelligible. What the written language does require such people to study language. Therefore, we must bear in mind a few important facts. The first is that language and culture are closely knitted and that it is a social product. The second is that it has no independent physical entity of its own, but consists merely of several types of sound mutually exchanged by men living in a community. The third is that it is forever changing and dynamic. As for the English language, it is spoken today over a large part of world with some local divergences called dialects. The UK, the US, Canada, and Australia are its native speakers, whereas the speakers of language in other countries employ it as a second language beside their mother tongues, as we in India do. The English language does not consistently maintain a correspondence between the written and spoken forms. It has numerous dialects and registers. Every language has a history of its own. The English language is no exception to this generality. It has a very rich historical and cultural tradition. The entire culture of English is enshrined in its pages. The proud history of the nation it is writ large in its literature and language. To be specific, the history of the English language with which we are concerned here dates back to the 5th or 6th century AD, when the diverse nomadic tribes, the Angles and Saxons, and the Druids crossed into Britain from without any settled down there permanently. The original inhabitants of Britain, called Celts, were now pushed to a subordinate position with the coming of Christian missionaries. The English or the Angles came into close contact with those who spoke Latin, and after the Norman conquest with those who spoke various forms of a language derived from Latin. To Latin, Greek was added with the Renaissance, and later still by their memorable political associations with various countries of the world. Languages theory of the origin. The language. Historians have advanced several theories of the origin of language, but before going into these theories, we would look into the biblical account of the origin of language. According to this account, the Lord God formed man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. Afterwards, he created trees and rivers, and then out of the ground of the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the air, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. The man gave names to all cattle and to the birds of the air and to every beast of the field. It is an account of the worth of language in man, who is placed at the center of the world. Besides the biblical theory, there are many more sophisticated theories of the modern world as to the origin of language. One of these theories is onomatopoeic and is irreverently called the Wow theory by Max Muller. This theory supposes that primitive words were imitative of sounds that man imitated the barking of dogs and thereby obtained a natural word with the meaning of dog or bark. Lennon objects to this theory on the ground that it seems rather absurd to up this chronological sequence. First, the lower animals are original enough to cry and roar, and then comes man, making a language for himself by imitating his inferior. What this is logical possible. This is logically possible, says Jesperson. This theory forms a part of the larger subject of sound symbolism. Another familiar theory of the origin of language is the Ding dong theory. At one stage it was upheld by Max Muller, but later it was abandoned. A third well-known theory of the origin of language is the poo-poo theory. This theory assumes that language originated in the cries or interjections of human beings, but this is an unhelpful doctrine. Such language begins where interjections end. A fourth famous theory of the origin of language is the gesture theory, which was formulated and advanced by Wilhelm Wundt and Sir Richard Paget. Wundt proposed that the earliest means of communication between human beings was the gesture of the hand. Paget stressed the role of the mouth gesture in articulation. Says rightly refers to the way in which gesture precede spoken language and lead on to the later. It is true that a gesture cannot become a word or a sentence, but it may influence them greatly. Any communication with the deaf and blind is possible by means of gestures or motions. Sir Percy Num, in his book Education, its Data and First Principles, develops this theory in full, and MacDonald Crinley deals with it elaborately in his work The Language of Gesture. Then we have Yo-Hey-Yo theory. Yo-Hey-Ho theory. Neuer saw the source of speech in acts of joint or common work in which, during intense physical effort, cries or sound partly consonantal might be emitted. Such sounds might come to be associated with the work performed and so become a for symbol for it. The first words would accordingly mean something like have or hall. Another theory to be mentioned by adduced over a century ago in the early days of modern linguistics. In 1823 was published in Edinburgh The History of the European Language of Alexander Murray, D.D. In this work, he states 9 words which he calls the foundation of language. They were uttered at first and probably for several generations in an insulated manner. The circumstances of the actions were communicated by gestures and variable tunes the voice, but actions themselves were expressed through suitable monosyllables. The last theory of the origin of language was proposed some years ago by the Danish linguist Otto Jespersen. This language expert says We must imagine primitive language as consisting chiefly at least of very long words full of difficult sounds and sung rather than spoken. It is the strangest of all theories what deserve serious thought because of the learning of the author a person unlike many other linguists of his day was not prepared to accept the view that the origin of speech is unknowable. He suggested that there was a time when all speech was song, or rather, when these two actions not yet differentiated. According to him, language was born in the courting days of man. All the instance theories are only partially true and do not seem to satisfy fully the intelligentsia. As they are many, they frustrate any attempt at arriving at an acceptable and convincing solution for the present. We may reset content with ample knowledge of the theory alone. Functions of language. As the functions of language, they are three in number. Of the functions, the first is the imparting of information of one or the other kind. Information includes propaganda of all kinds and even deliberate misinformation. It is said that language is mostly informative in character, as sciences are so because they unfold the truth to us. Besides the informative function, language has two more functions to perform: the expression and the directive. Poetry is the finest example of the expression function of language. Poets do not communicate mere information but also their feelings and attitudes. Their communication may be called poetic communication when Robert Burns compared his love to a red rose newly sprung in June or to a melody sweetly played in tune. He is employing the expression language in order to drive home the same feelings to his readers. Lovers also employ this type of language. The enchanted worshippers fervently praying to God or intently reciting the verses of the 23rd Psalm in the Old Testament also make use of this kind of language to express their feelings of awe and I and wonder. You and wonder. Language have all expressive two constituent elements: the attitude or feelings of the speaker and the evoking of the same attitude or feeling in the hearer. Sometimes these two elements may combine, as in the case of the lover wooing his day or the orator delivering his speech to the audience. The third basic function of language is to check some overact actions of men. The most explicit illustration of the directive language are commands and requests. At times, the three functions of language may combine, and hence a comparatively study of these becomes inevitable. A poem, for instance, may be taken to be both informative and directive. Similarly, a sermon may also be directive and expressive at the same time, though there are no watertight classifications to the function of language. At for all practical purposes, the above noted threefold classifications holds good. So friends, this is our today's topic. So This is the time when I have to go. See you tomorrow. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye bye.